Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please depart the Loy Henderson conference room and make your way to the Delegates Lounge and Courtyard Tent for lunch. We have staff attempting to reset the room right now, so we ask that you please depart the Loy Henderson conference room. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask again, if possible, to please leave the Loy Henderson conference room. Lunch is being served at this time. Staff are attempting to reset the room for this afternoon session, so please depart the Loy Henderson conference room at this time. Thank you.
Yes.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly.
Who am I giving remarks to?
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats at this time as the program will begin shortly. Thank you. Again, please take your seats at this time.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, Michelle Gaida.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Gaida. I'm the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs here at the State Department. And every day in public affairs, we engage audiences, both foreign and domestic, to communicate U.S. foreign policy, our national security interests, and American values. Among those values is religious freedom. And we know that's not only an American value, but a universal value and a building block for free societies. In a recent interview, Secretary Pompeo emphasized that we believe religious freedom is central to the world. And as the Secretary and other senior State Department officials have stated time and time again, religious freedom is a universal human right, and we must work together to defend it. Our next speaker escaped one of the worst countries in the world for religious freedom, North Korea. Since 2001, the country has been designated as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 for having engaged in or tolerated particularly severe violations of religious freedom. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea does not respect religious freedom, and the government continually represses the activities of members of religious groups. The government reportedly punishes citizens on their return to the country who have contact with religious organizations while abroad. North Koreans have been placed in detention centers, including political prison camps, for practicing their religious beliefs or possessing religious material. Ms. Ji Hyun-ah is one of those people. She fled North Korea 4 times in search of a better life. In 1998, the first time she and her family crossed the border into China, her father was arrested by Chinese authorities and was never seen again. Ms. Ji was also arrested and repatriated to North Korea, suffering beatings and harsh interrogation. She fled again in 1999 and 2000, but each time was arrested in China and sent back to North Korea. Ms. Ji was able to defect for the final time in 2002, eventually finding her way to South Korea in 2007. She has since become an active human rights advocate, a best-selling author, and an accomplished public speaker. She testified before the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on North Korea in 2014 and met Vice President Pence in South Korea earlier this year. In her testimony to Congress in December of last year, Ms. Ji recounted being tortured and detained for having a small Bible that her mother had given her. It is my honor to introduce a survivor who has overcome profound pain and adversity throughout her life and emerged as a tireless advocate and symbol of hope for others in her country and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Ji Hyun-ah.
Hello, my name is Hyun-ah Ji, and I am a Christian and a North Korean defector. 먼저 북한의 기독교 박해에 관심을 가져주시고 저를 초대해 주신 미 국무부 폼페오 장관님과 샘 브라운 백 대사님을 비롯한 모든 관계자분들께 감사드립니다.
First of all, I would like to begin by thanking Secretary Pompeo, Ambassador Brownback, and those at the State Department who have paid attention to North Korea's persecution of Christianity and invited me to this significant meeting.
저는 17년간 기독교 박해 국가 1위를 차지하는 북한에서 신앙의 자유를 박탈당한 지하교인들과 탈북 신앙인들을 대표하여 이 자리에 섰습니다.
I'm here today on behalf of the believers at North Korea's underground churches, as well as those Christian North Korean defectors in and from a country that has ranked the world's worst and most horrendous country with regards to Christian persecution.
저는 1998년 첫 탈북을 시작으로 2007년 대한민국 입국하기까지 3번의 북송과 4번의 탈북 과정에서 인신매매와 혼혈을 인정하지 않는 북한에서는 마취 없이 강제 낙태 수술을 당했습니다.
Since I first escaped from North Korea in 1998, I have since escaped from the North a total of 4 times and got repatriated to the North 3 times until I finally came to South Korea in 2007. In between, I fell victim to human trafficking, and I was also subjected to abortion violently forced on me, even with no anesthesia, because the North Korean regime couldn't accept what they call mixed blood.
또한 탈북했다는 이유로 증산 11호 교화소에서 수감 생활까지 해야 했습니다.
I was also imprisoned at Jungsan Camp number 11 for reasons of my defection.
태어나면서부터 부모의 이름과 생년월일은 몰라도 북한의 김씨 3대 독재자와 김씨 일가의 이름과 나이, 생년월일을 아는 것은 물론 김씨 일가 외에는 다른 신을 믿으면 절대 안 된다는 세뇌 교육을 받았습니다.
I was so thoroughly brainwashed to believe that you must worship the 3 generations of the Kim dictatorship and even memorize their birthdays, even at the expense of not knowing the names and birthdays of your own parents, and never to believe any other gods other than the Kim dynasty.
김일성은 하늘의 태양이었고 조선의 하나님이었습니다.
I was forced to believe that Kim Il-sung was literally the sun in the heaven and God of North Korea.
종종 TV에서는 6.25 한국 전쟁 때 미국 선교사가 사과 하나를 따먹었다는 이유로 북한 어린 소녀 이마에 염산으로 도적이라고 썼다는 내용의 영화 등 선교사들은 악한 자들이라는 선전을 하였습니다.
I grew up watching propaganda on TV depicting missionaries as evil. I remember particularly watching a movie where an American missionary poured hydrochloric acid on the forehead of a North Korean girl that says a thief just because she plucked an apple and ate it in the midst of the Korean War.
극심한 식량난에 엄마가 중국에서 쌀배낭에 넣고 온 자그마한 성경책을 저녁마다 몰래 펼쳐봤던 저는 보이부에서 고문을 받게 되었습니다.
When my mom finally went to China due to extreme food shortage in the north and came back with a sack of rice, there was a small Bible inside that sack. I read the Bible secretly every evening, and one day I was summoned by State Security Department and got tortured by them.
처음에 저는 무슨 영문으로 고문을 받는지도 몰랐습니다.
Initially, I didn't even know why I was being tortured.
제 몸에 사정없이 와닿는 구두발과 주먹은 여기저기 저의 온 몸을 피투성이로 만들어 놓았습니다.
But as I was kicked with boots on and beaten mercilessly, my whole body soon got bathed in blood, literally.
버이지더원은 언제부터 남조선 안기부와 미국 선교사들과 연락하고 있는가, 무슨 임무를 받았는가 등 고문 중에 전혀 생각지도 못한 질문들을 하였습니다.
During this torture, security agents asked me, "Since when have you stayed in touch with the South Korean CIA and American missionaries? And what mission were you given by them?" I had absolutely no idea where those questions were coming from.
저는 모두 모르는 일이라고 하였습니다.
I kept saying that I had no clue about those questions.
5시간 동안 동일한 질문에 동일한 대답을 하니 그제서야 버이지더원은 고문을 멈추고 책상 위에 제가 보던 성경책을 올려놓으면서 이건 뭐냐고 물었습니다.
Since I repeated this basically same answer to the same repeated question for 5 hours, the agents finally stopped the torture, but put the Bible that I had read secretly in my house on the table and asked me, "What is this then?"
저는 깜짝 놀랐지만 침착해야만 했고 길가에서 주웠다고 거짓말을 하여야만 했습니다.
I was so surprised, but I had to keep calm and tell them a lie that I had just stumbled upon it while I was walking on the street.
이 책의 내용이 무엇이며 왜 바치지 않았는지 상세히 물어보는 그에게 저는 바치려고 했지만 시간이 안 되었다고 대답을 했습니다.
He then pressed me hard for an answer as to what this book was all about and why I hadn't reported it if I just found it on the street. And I just kept repeating my answer that I wanted to, but I just missed opportunities.
이로써 저는 5시간의 검문과 신문을 끝내고 풀려나게 되었습니다.
Finally, the 5-hour-long torturous interrogation ended, and I got released.
북한 독재자의 신격화를 위해서는 온갖 거짓 선동과 기독교인들을 박해하는 북한의 폭정임을 확인하는 순간들이었습니다.
It was really a rude awakening for me to the violence and barbarity of the regime that does not mind all the fake propaganda and persecution against Christians just in order to idolize the dictator.
세 번 북송 때마다 진행되는 신문에는 교회를 다녔는지, 예수를 아는지, 하나님을 믿었는지 등 기독교 관련 질문을 빼놓지 않았습니다.
Each time when I got repatriated, which is a total of 3 times, they never finished their interrogation without asking me those Christian-related questions, such as whether I went to church, whether I knew Jesus, and whether I believed God.
만약 예수를 믿고 교회를 다녔다는 말을 조금이라도 내비치면 정치범 수용소로 보내지거나 사형을 면치 못합니다.
If there is a slightest indication or confession that you believe Jesus and went to church, then you will surely be sent to political prison camp or executed.
예수님을 3번 부인했던 베드로처럼 저는 3번의 북송에 3번 거짓말을 해야 했습니다.
And just like Peter denied Jesus 3 times, I lied each of those 3 times when I got repatriated and got interrogated.
저는 하나님께 물었습니다.
I asked God,
하나님, 우린 왜 신앙의 자유마저 없는 겁니까?
Lord, why is it that we don't even have freedom of faith?
왜 우린 예수님을 믿는다면 죽어야만 하고 감옥에 가야 합니까?
Why do we have to be executed or sent to prison just because we believe in Jesus?
언제면 찬양을 마음껏 부를 수가 있나요?
Lord, when can we ever freely sing praises unto you?
그때 하나님은 저에게 내 백성을 위해 가서 알려라는 사명을 주셨습니다.
Right at that moment, God gave me a mission to go and tell it for my people.
저는 피 묻은 뼈로 한자 한자 글로 북한 인권을 알리는 사역을 감당하고 있는 탈북 작가로서 여러분들에게 호소합니다.
As a writer who carries a bone that is stained with blood still, and who is doing the ministry of writing about human rights conditions in North Korea with a trembling heart, I'm here to appeal to you today.
자칭 신이라고 하는 김일성, 김정일, 김정은 3대 김씨 일가는 하나님을 대적하는 사이비 종교 이단 주체 사상교 교주들입니다.
Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un, which is the 3-generation Kim dictatorship, is a self-styled God and opposes the true God, and they are the leaders of a cult and a false religion.
더 이상 보고만 있을 수는 없습니다.
We cannot just sit and keep watching what they are doing,
무관심은 사람을 죽이는 가장 큰 도구입니다.
because indifference is the most tragic tool that puts people to death and kill them.
마틴 루터 킹 목사는 최대 비극은 악한 사람들의 거친 아우성이 아니라 선한 사람들의 소름 끼치는 침묵이다라고 했습니다.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, quote, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people," unquote.
여러분들의 관심 하나하나, 기도 하나하나가 북한의 그리스도인들에게 힘이 됩니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, your personal attention and interest, your each prayer do matter, and they give strength and courage to the Christians who are now living in North Korea.
저는 미국과 국제사회가 악한 바로왕에게 내 백성을 보내라 라고 당당하게 이야기했던 모세처럼 북한 김정은 폭정에게 북한 그리스도인에 대한 박해를 멈추라는 강한 메시지를 던지는 등 북한을 압박하는 대북 제재를 지속화하여 동방의 이스라엘 통일항구, 동방의 예루살렘 평양이 회복되길 간절히 바랍니다.
Lastly, just as Moses spoke boldly to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," I sincerely and earnestly desire that the United States and the international community send a very strong, unmistakable message to the violent Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea to stop persecuting Christians in North Korea and for the international community to continue with the pressure on North Korea, thus leading to the restoration of Israel in East, which will be a unified Korea, and the restoration of Jerusalem in East, which will be a new Pyongyang.
Let my people go. Free North Korea. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking again Ms. Ji Hyun-ah for her courage and her advocacy for religious freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of the Office of International Religious Freedom, Dan Nadel.
Well, good afternoon. It is an absolute pleasure to see so many colleagues, friends, partners in this struggle in one place at the same time, all for the same purpose. In October 1998, the United States Congress came together and overwhelmingly passed the International Religious Freedom Act, landmark bipartisan legislation that placed the right to freedom of conscience at the heart of U.S. foreign policy. This law created not only the position of Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, currently held by Sam Brownback, but it also created an office devoted to protecting and promoting the fundamental freedom to believe or not to believe. Our office is charged with using all available tools of diplomacy, both positive and punitive, to advance respect for freedom of every person in every corner of the globe to believe or not to believe, to change their beliefs, to speak, gather, teach, and worship as they choose. In some instances, you've seen our efforts play out in real time as we publicly demand the release of particular individuals, or express concern about specific actions of governments, or deliver statements and speeches in venues such as this one. And through our signature public product, the annual International Religious Freedom Reports, we use our global platform to inform people everywhere about the state of religious freedom in nearly 200 countries and territories. Those reports would simply not be possible without the information and support provided by you, our international civil society partners. In that regard, we take tremendous pride in the unique role we play as the primary point of contact between the Department of State and civil society, including religious organizations and human rights groups on the front lines of advocacy. We carry your voices into policy discussions up to the senior-most levels of the United States government, and your information and feedback ultimately makes our policies more effective. It is also important to recognize the strong work of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USIRF, which serves as an independent watchdog of the administration's efforts and provides feedback and, where necessary, critique of how the Department of State is doing in safeguarding and advancing religious freedom. But by its very nature, much of the work we do is behind the scenes, as we quietly but vigorously work to free individuals imprisoned on account of their beliefs, or as we encourage governments to reform problematic laws or address abuses by their security services. We impose sanctions on governments that are the most egregious violators of religious freedom and against foreign officials who are behind those abuses. We have also developed a series of tools to concretely assist individuals who find themselves in crisis on account of their beliefs. including by removing them physically from harm's way and connecting victims and survivors with lawyers to defend their interests, physical security for them and their families, and psychosocial services to help them begin to heal from the traumas they've suffered. Since 1998, the Department of State has devoted tens of millions of dollars to foreign assistance programs aimed at promoting religious freedom around the world. Over this period, we have supported an array of initiatives that aim to address the root causes of intolerance in societies, increase public awareness and understanding of fundamental rights, train civil society and government officials on the legal and policy frameworks for religious freedom, strengthen the capacity of religious leaders to promote faith-based cooperation across religious and sectarian lines, empower religious minorities to participate fully in their domestic political processes, and help combat religiously motivated discrimination and violence. It is now my pleasure to turn the mic over to Pat Davis, the Director of the Office of Global Programs within the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, to tell us more about these vital programmatic efforts and how you can get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I must say we've been great partners for many years now, and I'm thrilled to be here with you on this panel, but also pleased to be here at the first ministerial addressing international religious freedom around the world. I'm also honored to say that I have been a part of DRL, of the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, for nearly 20 years now, and I've worked under 4 administrations, including an exciting 2.5 years as the Director for Democracy and Human Rights under President Bush and the National Security Council. I love my job. People keep saying, when are you going to retire? And I said, I'm not retiring. I love my job. And I'm proud of the work that we do here at the State Department and in DRL about how we do take the hard-earned taxpayer money, including mine, and how we turn around that to support fundamental freedoms around the world. And I will also say at the outset, we're probably one of the parts of the Department of State you have heard about the least because of the sensitive nature of what we do. As Dan noted, we support religious freedom around the world. We support the rights of persons to exercise their freedoms of association and assembly. We support the right to have access to justice. We support the right to have access to objective information. All of that, as you can imagine, in some of what I like to call the garden spots of the world, in the most restrictive environments, as well as conflict-driven areas. So many times we just simply can't talk about our programs, so let me just say that at the outset, that we are very discreet in what we do, and many times I'd like to be able to shout it out to the rafters about the great work we do, but we wouldn't be able to do it if we were doing it so loudly and clearly and giving the recipe to dictators and authoritarian governments that don't want us to be able to do our work. But we've been here for nearly 20 years, over 20 years now doing program, and I've been a part of that. And so I want to be able to talk about it today. I will give you some concrete examples in a minute, but I'm not going to drill down. I'm not going to mention countries, but I'll give you a flavor of the types of programs we do and how you can become a part of that. So let me, before I tell you that exciting part about how you too can join us in these efforts, let me tell you a little bit of brief history about the Office of Global Programming within the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and how our funding works. I think almost concurrently with the International Religious Freedom Act, Congress also established upon request by the State Department what's called the Human Rights and Democracy Fund, which is the label of the funding that we in DRL fund for our programs around the world. Established, as I say, in 1998, the fund started out at a very small $9 million and has grown to over $250 million today. So as you can imagine, it has enjoyed very strong bipartisan support across these 4 administrations who believe in the work that we do and support the work that we do, and we've been able to show the impact of the work that we do. The fund is designed, as I said, to support fundamental rights, human rights around the world, including rule of law. We work mainly with civil society organizations, including the free media and independent journalists, because we believe that's the best way to have democratic, accountable governance, is to build the demand side for that, is to work with civil society, watchdog organizations, investigative journalists, for them to be able to report and talk out and be a voice for the people so they can demand that their government be accountable to them and uphold their rights. The programs that we support and program and award every year are programs that support the foreign policy objectives of the administration, of the Secretary of State, and of course, the Assistant Secretary for DRL, as well as the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom. We identify the priorities based on what you see in our annual Human Rights Report, as well as the Religious Freedom Report, where we carefully detail what the significant issues and grievances are in a particular country. We take those problems, we analyze them, and every year, based on what's happening in the world at that time, we design programs and solicit proposals to be able to address all of these problems around the world, every region of the world, across a range of thematic issues. Of course, one of the most significant parts of the work that we do is promoting international religious freedom as a fundamental right. And we have done that from the very beginning of the early days of the Human Rights and Democracy Fund. When I look back at the records, that first year programming in 1999, with our very small amount, about a third of that went to international religious freedom. We supported religious reconciliation programs in the Middle East. We helped host a World Conference on Religion and Peace in Southeast Asia. And for me, very personally, a painful yet meaningful program that I managed was supporting the International Commission on Missing Persons in Bosnia and Kosovo, where the work of the ICMP was to exhume mass graves and identify the remains of those victims to help get them back to their loved ones and document the atrocities that happened, some of the most atrocious kinds of religious persecution that had happened since World War II. So that's just a very early flavor of what we were doing from the very beginning. Of course, over the years, as I said, the fund has grown and we've matured in our strategic approach to promoting fundamental freedoms. We now have teams of experts on every fundamental right and region in the world. At this point, I'd like to point out my team that works on international religious freedom, Darren McCanley and Mary Gunderson over there. Those are the two who do the work on a daily basis. If you have any questions, please see them afterwards. And there are other members of my team who work on different regions of the world who also do programs, manage programs on international religious freedom. As we've matured, as I said, we've also, most importantly, we have put in place a rigorous standard for evaluating the proposals that we receive every year, which can number in the thousands, as well as how do we measure the impact of our programs? How are we sure that we're actually having an impact, that we're making change happen? And let me just walk you through the strategic framework we have for our programs that promote international religious freedom around the world. I want to give you some of the examples of the work that we kind of do, which in hopes that for those of you who are interested in applying for money and getting access to this funding, that you can understand where we're coming from when we solicit our proposals. Let me just start first with the vision that we have for our programming, and I'm just going to read that. Our vision for the programming is that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Let me repeat that. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. It's kind of a mighty task that we have taken on, but we're not shying away from it. But we've taken that now and we've set two different major objectives that we focus on in our programming. The first major objective is looking at government and policy advancements in the area of religious freedom. And secondly, we look at social tolerance, or the lack thereof, as the second component that you need to have for international religious freedom. So in other words, what we're doing is we're tackling religious freedom by working from the top down as well as the bottom up. A two-pronged approach that we have found is necessary if we're going to achieve that right of everyone to have to practice their freedom of belief. In some places we focus on more than the others, particularly in those cases where governments may not be willing to advance the rights of religion and belief. In those cases, we focus on the societal issues to at least grow tolerance, to help citizens understand each other and allow each other to participate in their religion of choice. So when we solicit proposals, you're going to see two sets of targeted issues we look at. One is, how can we address those government constraints on religious freedom? We look at restrictive laws, policies, regulations, or actions that discriminate. Many countries of the world might have a wonderful constitution that guarantees every right possible, they're just not implemented. Or they might have those constitutional guarantees, but they're not actually implementing. They don't have the laws to implement them, they don't have the ability to implement them, or simply might not be interested in implementing them. So one of those is getting at those restrictions and constraints. Secondly, the societal constraints. Here we're focusing on discrimination, harassment, as well as violence that is directed at individuals and who are being persecuted because of their beliefs. This includes a lot of tolerance building around the world. This includes bringing together interfaith organizations. It includes bringing youth across regions, across religions, learning how they can learn to not treat the other as the other, but to treat them as fellow citizens, to learn to see there's no difference between them, to do projects together so that they will grow up being tolerant and hopefully end some of these horrendous societal discriminations that we see around the world. So most of our programs will include one of the following activities: strengthening legal advocacy within the judicial sector, building government capacity and legal reform, including demanding it from the outside, political advocacy by minority communities, peace building and mitigating societal tensions and conflict, coalition building among civil society organizations, not just across religions, but across the whole spectrum of human rights organizations, raising awareness of discriminatory practices that are happening, as well as documenting the atrocities that are going on every day around the world to see some type of accountability, whether it's some kind of criminal accountability or at least having a memory, a truth for what has happened so that families can take comfort that voices are at least being heard. And lastly, we promote tolerance. As I said, the idea is to say we're all citizens. We should not only be tolerant, but embrace one another, accept one another as equals. So before I go on to pointing out, before I go into any more details though, I would like to point out, as I said at the beginning, the fundamental guiding principle of all of our programs is do no harm. Especially, I would say, for an area that is both legally and personally sensitive as international religious freedom. So we do not go into detail about our programs. You're not going to see on our website, unfortunately, most of these programs. We don't necessarily brand our programs as being U.S. government funded. We rely on our local partners to determine whether they think it's safe for them to do that or not. But most importantly, that is what we do. We listen to our local partners on the ground in these communities, and we let them guide us as to what they think is desirable, what is needed, and what is safe. So I ask for their sake that please use discretion when discussing these funds and these programs. It's one of my biggest frustrations to, as I mentioned, to not to be able to talk about all that we accomplish. And this has been raised before, and to me, I'm sorry, the bottom line is, would you rather do good things or would you rather talk about them and no longer be able to do good things? So that's the dilemma we face, but I assure you that we are, and I can go into some more detail personally, but I don't want to do this in front of all of the cameras here. So let me give you some actual examples that are things that have recently accomplished and things that are going on right now. As mentioned, one way we address religious freedom and rule of law is to increase the legal protection of religious minorities by training lawyers to help fight for those legal rights. In one example, we trained lawyers in a particular country to ensure that converts from one religion to another were not being subjected to courts that were being governed by a different majority religion. So in this case, what we did is that lawyers that were trained by DRL were able to transfer cases from a religious court to a civil court, and that ensured a fair trial for the defendant who had converted, as I said, from a majority to a minority religion. In this case, the defendant won, and I will say it was her rights, but she won her case, and this set an important case law precedent for future religious minority court cases to be handled in a civil rather than a religious court of freedom. We've taken this example and this success and have developed resources for future lawyers to use in cases involving persecution of religious minorities. So this is a real live example of what we were able to do to make life better for religious minorities in a country. In another place, we engaged both civil society and government stakeholders to draft a law addressing the very personal issue of burial rights for religious minorities. In this case, families were not allowed to bury their loved ones in the family cemetery plot if their loved ones had converted to another religion. Even though there were no laws in place forbidding this, that was the custom. So after carrying out negotiations and dialogues with civil society, local government officials and religious leaders. A new law was drafted and proposed that will resolve the community conflict in the future and allow these loved ones to be buried, to bury their loved ones in the family plot, the plot of their choice, providing immense solace, of course, for grieving families. In terms of addressing societal constraints on religious freedom, when we look around the world, we have determined that in many cases, societal constraints are stemming from actual community conflict. So we don't shy away. We do go into places where conflict is ongoing. And in one particular country, we worked with local level official leaders, very grassroots, working with Protestant, Catholic, and Muslim leaders to publicly promote peace through interfaith dialogues. This initiative responded to local political instability and civil conflict in the country, and we were able to document that in the case of where these local leaders were, they were able to reduce community violence in the communities where they lived. It's a small example that we have scaled up in other places, but I want you to show these aren't big talk fests at some high level. We go down to the grassroots, and we're talking to the people, and we're trying to deal with their daily problems that they are dealing with. Another effort on community peace, outside of community peace building efforts, we do a lot of work to counter hate speech, particularly hate speech online. And unfortunately, one of the bad byproducts of the ability to be able to communicate online is not being able to just share good information, but it has increased by huge magnitudes the ability to have hate speech online. So we've done a project, cross-country regional project where we were countering where we are at this date still, countering hate speech online that includes anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, and anti-Christian sentiments that appear online in news articles, blogs, or social media. We have trained civil society groups and youth, and particularly the youth. This is amazing to see these young kids. They're monitoring this hate speech online, and they're being trained to provide positive counter messages to debunk these stereotypes and to quell calls for violence against religious groups. So we're countering hate speech through better speech. We're not shutting speech down. We're pointing out that some of these are most egregious stereotypes that have been around for, in many cases, hundreds of years, and pointing that out, that this is simply a myth, this isn't true, and this is not acceptable behavior. Some of this has actually been calling out the hate speech by elected leaders that we've had them retracted or stop making those kinds of comments. The these civil society groups have also worked with social media companies to remove violent messaging. And we've had media outlets retract or correct articles. So we're using the technology there to point out to social media companies that their own rules are being violated, that people are advocating for violence or perhaps are impersonating and are not actually a real live Facebook author, for example. So that's one of the ways that we're taking and engaging youth. As I said, this is across religions, across faiths, not even necessarily even faith-based. Youth who are understanding what's being told to them today is something that is just continuing to generate these conflicts and stereotypes. Before I now turn to a very, very brief overview of the nuts and bolts of how we program, I want to give a few more details about our programs in an area of the world where we have seen some of the worst atrocities committed and what we have done to redress them. I'm talking about Iraq and the areas devastated by ISIS, especially those areas where there are large populations of religious minorities who were subject to ISIS genocide and persecution. In the summer of 2014, immediately after ISIS invaded Iraq, in Deir El, and my teams that work on Iraq, as well as my religious freedom team, as well as working with Dan's team, worked very hard, day and night, to repurpose some new programs that were about to come online in Iraq. Within the space of 30 days, they literally, and no pun intended, they literally moved heaven and earth to stand up new programs that were specifically designed to address the immediate needs of these communities who are being the direct victims of assault. Since 2014, we have assisted religious and ethnic minority families in the Ninawa to document and resolve cases of properties confiscated and sold or stolen by ISIS. We've used field investigators in courts. We've been documenting land loss using satellite imagery to be able to show that, in fact, this family did own this piece of property or had access to this property. Through one project alone, we have supported over 1,000 or nearly 1,000 survivors of rape and sexual violence. And we have trained Iraqi service providers to provide the psychosocial support needed for these survivors, doing home visits, going in and raising awareness about the long-term effects of torture and sexual violence in a way that maintains survivor dignity, privacy, and respect. And on that note, I will also say, I ask you to respect them, that many of these victims do not like to talk about this because it would ostracize them and stigmatize them even more within their communities. But this work is ongoing, and we continue to do everything we can and providing these services, but localizing it so it's appropriate to the local communities. So, on that note, you might ask, how can you join us in this important work? Simple answer is apply for funding. We have yearly ongoing requests for proposals. They're formally known as notification of funding opportunities. That's a long word. We affectionately call them NOFOs, notification of funding opportunities. There are 3 upcoming opportunities that you can learn more about, as I said, this very nuts and bolts process of how you navigate the federal procurement process, which I am the first to admit is very laborious, but needed. So, this coming Thursday, 2 days from now, there is going to be a follow-on event hosted by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom that is going to go into specific details about how do you access U.S. government funding. Space is limited, so you have to RSVP today, I understand. It's the RSVP is training at usurf.gov, training at USCIRF, USCIRF.gov. There will be representatives from my bureau as well as USAID, as well as the Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migrations, who will be giving presentations on how do you apply for grants. In addition, every year DRL hosts what we call a conference for potential applicants. I don't like that title either, but it's open to anybody to come. It's a day-long conference to learn about how to go through, as I said, this process. We have people from the front office, the assistant secretary generally speaks, the ambassador at large is invited. You can hear about what our priorities are for programming around the world, as well as, again, how you do that. This year's annual conference is October 26th, and it is held here in the department as well as live streamed on DRL's Facebook page. Registration information for this is at DRL's website, state.gov/J/DRL, I apologize, and you will go to a page that says open calls for statements of interest and requests for proposals. Again, just put in request for proposals DRL and it'll take you to the registration page for our annual conference. And then lastly, on that same website page, you will see a video of last year's conference with subtitles for those who are hearing impaired, and you can follow and you can see all the presentations that will given. Let me just point out again, I can go through some of the most important tips here to point out that our foreign assistance is available to anyone. Anyone can apply. You can be a registered NGO, an American-based one, a foreign-based one. You can be a foreign public entity. You can be a university, a college. In a few instances, under certain conditions, you can be a for-profit, but generally these are for nonprofit organizations only. You can be secular, you can be faith-based. It doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is that you submit a good proposal. We have the same standards that we apply across the board for all of our proposals. The first one being quality of idea. It's important for us to know you've got a great idea and it's a feasible idea. But that's what we really look for, are those kinds of ideas that we're willing to take a little risk. We're willing to say, show us some creative ideas, and then we will work with you to develop the rest of it that you might need to have contingency plans, coming up with good indicators so we can measure impact. I'd like to think that we're pretty user-friendly when it comes to applying for our programs and walking you through the process. But as I said, you can go to our website. When we post these solicitations, there will be a place where you can ask questions or who you can reach out to for questions. It's kind of an anticlimactic ending, but I thought I would leave some time for actual questions.
Thank you so much, Pat. And with that, I'd like to open the floor up to questions. If you happen to be seated by place with microphones, feel free to press the button and use those once you've been recognized. For those of you who are not seated in areas with microphones, there are 2 common microphones set up, one by this door and the other one on the opposite side of the room by this door. So, please.
Nathan Weininger, 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. Ms. Davis, thank you so much for your work. It's a particular virtue to do work when it can't be noticed, and so we thank you for that. My question is, earlier today we heard that we should be working on targeting outcomes or perhaps impact, not just activities. And you just mentioned indicators. What are some best practices or resources that people might look to if they were looking to make a proposal that would develop M&E that would support outcome measures as opposed to simply activity measures?
That is an excellent question, and I would urge you to go to our website. We have some primers there as well as some example monitoring evaluation plans and some sample indicators that you can use. But for us, again, what you might see is we want to go in and build tolerance, so we're going to work with 25 youth groups and bring in faith-based leaders for 50 workshops. Those are outputs, those aren't outcomes. What we want to see is what's going to result as, what will happen as a result of all of those trainings or workshops or dialogues. So it could be anything from groups come together and come up with a joint action plan, how they will work in their villages across faiths to improve, I don't know, it could be anything from the soccer fields to some kind of social entrepreneurial work. Many times our programs do include funding to do small grants for that. It might be working on combating hate speech, that we're actually able to say, monitor particular websites and see if cases of hate speech have gone down, or if websites have retracted things. So what we're working for is actual change, not just saying we're going to go in and work with people and bring them together. That's the first step, but that's not the change that we need to see happen. But I know it might sound like I'm pushing you off, but I guarantee you we have a crack team, and they put together a really good primer for how do you develop really good outcome indicators. But I can assure you, if you submit a great proposal, or a proposal with a great idea, and you've got it all figured out how you're going to do it, we'll work with you to say, before we give you that money, we're going to work with you on those outcomes.
In the rear, please.
Hello. I am curious, I have a question about how do you deal with an internal dialogue between the different offices related in this case with DRL regarding some, how to address some complex intersectionalities and maybe collision of rights that sometimes emerge. So for example, in Latin America, we have been seeing for the last maybe 5 years how the rise of very radical groups from both Catholic and evangelicals had an attack with a lot of hate speeches, the rights of LGBTI groups in having a cover on their freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And that has also created not only discrimination and a lot of going backwards on LGBT rights, but also has invisibilized and silenced other progressive Catholic and evangelical groups that have been creating in the region a lot of discrimination and stigmatization in general on the religious groups and internally in civil society organizations. So I'm just wondering, and I'm very curious about how do you intersect those and how do you deal with those collisions internally?
Well, just to start off, the answer is carefully. I think the answer is that we have to embrace the complexities of the world and the fact that we are dealing with rights ecosystems where individual rights are not just on an island. They're closely related. I mean, questions of religion, can they be separated from questions of ethnicity, questions of race, questions of social status in a society? I mean, the answer is absolutely not. So I think one of the ways that we seek to balance all of these aspects of a situation is by trying to do the most proactive, broad-based outreach that we can. I don't want to speak for Pat on this, but I think what we tend to see in good proposals are proposals that really acknowledge where these complexities lie, and then provide thoughtful approaches to navigating them in ways that seem to advance whatever the underlying rights are that we're trying to promote in the situation. So I know that's not the clearest answer, but I think the reality is we totally acknowledge what you're calling attention to, which is this, the push and the pull of a variety of aspects of human rights, and our effort is to ensure that those aspects are managed in any of the activities that we undertake, both policy related and programmatic.
And I would point out, you have raised a growing, I don't want to say growing, but an important issue that we are taking across the board. What we do, an intersectional approach, where we're saying there is an intersection literally between some of these rights, and the best way to solve them is to be as inclusive as possible in everything we do. So the issues that face a persecuted religious group or harassed or discriminated may be the same ones that an LGBT group faces, or persons with disability, women's rights, ethnic minority rights. So we do take that approach. But I will say the two that, and we do programs, for example, working with religious leaders on, say, how religious beliefs are compatible with women's rights. We don't tell them that. They come across that themselves, but we bring people together to discuss that. But I will say in my work, I travel a lot, because, as I say, our belief is we're not going to sit back here in Washington, D.C. and say, we know what the best answers are. So we travel a lot to talk to the groups, the people on the ground. And I have traveled quite a bit in Africa and in the Pacific Islands. And my work working with LGBTI persons, some of that has been one of the most painful persecutions, or one of the most painful problems and discriminations, I should say, they face, is that they are not accepted in their religious communities. And it's very important to them, because to them they have such a deep faith, and it's very difficult to say, I am who I am, and I want to be able to continue to do that. And so we actually have quite a few programs that work with religious leaders on how they themselves, this is not the U.S. government telling anybody to think, and it's not the U.S. government even in the room, how our partners can work and engage on religious leaders, on tolerance. Again, it could be LGBTI, it could be on disabilities, it could be on women's issues, ethnic minorities. And so we do take that approach of saying, it is there, and if that's what they want, if that's what their belief is, they want to be accepted, it needs to be inclusive. And it's had a lot of success. I will say that I have been very impressed some of our work, working with faith-based leaders on how to come up with acceptance of how they choose to be open to their own constituents.
Please, left here.
Hi there. Thank you for such a thorough explanation of the opportunities, and also for the ability to ask questions. It's very important. So from the standpoint of track record, how should an organization that has experience domestically look at these opportunities if they want to expand their projects from just the domestic arena to the international arena? Should they get a few years of experience doing so and then apply? Or are you open for applications that are kind of the startup on the international side?
Well, of course, we are open to anyone, but I will say one of our 8 standard criteria, one of it is organizational record and capacity, which is important to us because I said both the nature of our work, but where we're working. With an exception, a few exceptions, most of the places where we work, it can be either open conflict or it's a very restrictive environment. So of course we wouldn't want anybody, our beneficiaries nor our implementing partners, to get in trouble. And so what I would urge you to do is to think about partnering with another group that may be doing that. In fact, we do that a lot of times also with local organizations, is find a partner who's been doing this work, put a proposal together with them. It's also the nature of federal money. I'm telling you, it's a horrible morass, but let me tell you, we know exactly how every penny that you pay in your taxes is spent. So that's the other thing I would urge you is there are some courses I think you can take on how do you manage a federal budget, how to manage federal funding. But I would think about what kind of partners or what kind of groups do you know that are out there doing this work, and contact them. They might be looking for exactly that kind of expertise too. But we are open to say what kind of work you've done here to apply elsewhere. It could be, for example, working with interfaith youth groups in the United States of how you've come across adversity, applying that method someplace else. So we encourage it. And many times when we do get proposals, it's clear they've got a great idea, but they just can't implement it because of their capacity or not having all the capacity they need. We many times will encourage somebody to reach out to them and say, hey, maybe you want to think about working with this group.
Thank you very much.
Very great. Is there a requirement, like in the past, that organizations that get funded and that would deploy activities, funded activities in a country must be legally registered in that country or not? If that's the case, then that would exclude a lot of genuine groups in countries like Vietnam or Laos or maybe China, because in those countries, independent NGOs are not allowed. Only allowed are the government-organized NGOs or GONGOs or international NGOs that submit themselves to the restrictions and controls by the government. Thank you.
That is a very important question, and I will tell you, we do not require that a group be registered. It will say something like, if you're a US-based organization, you have a 5013 tax-exempt status, nonprofit status. We do not require that, and the reason I kind of grin when you said that is because I'll tell you one of the reasons why, but no, we do not. We work with any group, and group is loosely defined. We do ask that you have to have some semblance of an organization, have a financial officer, or you have, somebody has to sign for it. But that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, because we do want to be able to work with grassroots organizations. The reason I grinned is there's also a law out there, affectionately known as the Brownback Amendment, that was put into law when Ambassador Brownback was a senator. And it says in there that in terms of democracy and human rights democracy and human rights programming, that a government cannot determine who we work with and on what we're working them with. We interpret that in DRL as saying, if we are only allowed to work with groups the government chooses to register, that means we're giving them the right to determine who we work with, and we don't do that.
Milica Pešić, Media Diversity Institute, London. I want to thank Pat's team for enthusiasm and commitment to what you've been doing. And a question, you mentioned Balkans, Bosnia and Kosovo, and as you know, reconciliation process, almost quarter of a century, is not finished yet, and the hate speech is back, and very nationalistic leaders are back. Are you coming back? Thank you.
By are you, I hope you don't mean the US government, maybe DRL. We never went away. We've been working there, maybe not as full strength as previously, but I know AID is there, and we have done programs that work with youth, not only across religions, but also ethnicities. We've done work working with Roma, and we are actually beefing up some of the work that we're doing, particularly working across the media and providing access to objective information in the Balkans. So yes, we're still there. I will say, when I started the State Department in 1999, I worked on Europe, and Kosovo had the conflict had just ended. And we worked a lot with, obviously, the Kosovo Albanians, but there was a Serb newspaper in Kosovo that wanted to continue to print and be attentive to Serbs being tolerant of the Kosovo Albanians. We managed to keep that printing. I can say this now, I think, since it's been 20 years. We actually got a Kosovo Albanian printing press to print the newspaper, but only at night, and they came in through the back door, but they printed it. So yes, we're there.
Please. Ann Bawalda with Jubilee Campaign. My question has to do with, could you give us a little bit more flavor as to how many countries that you've actually participated in assisting funding. And the reason I'm asking the question is specifically there's an interest by some individuals and organizations in countries where it's not known to be as major, quote unquote, as other countries. Like, you know, there's issues that could be addressed, and this may be an avenue and there's an interest there. Would they have to sort of demonstrate some threshold that they have to meet in order to be able to qualify?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, our money is not unlimited. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we do set priorities every year, and it's looking at where the problems are the worst. But sometimes then we also say where there are opportunities. So obviously in the case of international religious freedom, we're going to look at those countries of particular concern as being the worst of the worst. Not always can you have a gigantic program there. We do what we can. But we also look at places where there's opportunities for having an impact. Sometimes we look at those that could be kind of have a demonstrative effect of saying, well, if this country does this, it might have an amplifying effect. It can demonstrate in the region what can be done. So it's not always just the countries that are in the news every day, but we actually operate, I believe we have programs in over 100 countries in the world at any given time. Now we may not, our programs are multi-year, so we might do a program in one country one year and then the next year we won't solicit because that program is still going. But we do try to look for those places where we think we can have an impact. So it may not be, again, what's in the headlines, but it's something where we said we can move the needle here.
Thank you. Kate Nahapetian with the Armenian Legal Center. I wanted to ask more about the work that DRL is doing with properties and religious rights, because I think there is a direct link. We have found that in the case of extreme religious persecution, such as genocide, there is a profit motive for acquiring these properties. And religious minorities are the easiest targets to try to get properties. And so I was very interested to learn about the work you are doing in Iraq to document the properties and return them, because if we're able to work towards returning properties, you eliminate that profit motive for persecution and genocide.
Thank you. No, I agree with you that unfortunately the motives, well, the motives can be manyfold, and one of them can be sheer profit and getting access to property or particular property where there might be, you know, valuable commodities, what have you. But we do see that is you're not going to have reconciliation, you're not going to have peaceful, long-term peace if people can't go back to their properties, if they choose to do so. And so that is something that we have started doing more and more of, which is when we're documenting, say, atrocities or crimes against humanity, it's not just that people are being killed and tortured, but their property is being destroyed and are confiscated. So we have started doing that as a recognition of that exact same phenomenon that you talked about.
Please. Yes, thank you. My name is William Warda from Hammurabi Human Rights Organization, Iraq, and also Alliance of Iraqi Minorities. Thank you that you mentioned you work in Nineveh. So we are working all over the Iraq, and we are focusing on the issue of the minorities, especially Yazidis, Christian, Kakais, and the Mandais, and all other minorities in the region. You spoke about the calls for proposals. You know, this proposal is just for the American organization, international, or some local, they have opportunity to do that. What we face in the local organization, Iraqi civil society, there are many civil society, they are working in many issues, reconciliation, freedom of religions, and also tolerance, human rights, but they have no chance to win this kind of fund because sometimes because of complicated procedures, and they need some Dennis number and so on and so on. So my question is those local civil society, Iraqi civil society, have chances to win this kind of fund, and especially they cannot depend on the government, all those Iraqi organization depend on outside funds. Thank you very much.
Yes, and again, I will apologize profusely for federal procurement rules. You mentioned DUNS numbers, for example, as being
Yes.
one of the first hurdles. We do recognize that, and as I said, our hope is to support as many local organizations as possible instead of going through an intermediary. It's not always possible, but we do have a process to do that, and we have done that in Iraq, I believe, where it's a kind of a two-step process. You can see this again on our website. Instead of a notification of funding opportunities where you have to submit a full-blown proposal with your indicators and a budget, it's called submit a statement of interest. We limit them to three pages, literally. We stop reading after 3 pages, which is just give us your great ideas. If we like your ideas, we'll get back to you and say, now submit the full proposal. Now we'll work with you to get your DUNS number and do all of that. So we have done that in Iraq and a number of other places, because we want to have the opportunity for groups such as yours to be able to apply for this money. So we have done that, and I can tell you sometimes when we do this, we get thousands of proposals. We have done, I'm pretty sure we did this in Iraq last year, but I'm very familiar with your organization, and you work for the U.S. Institute for Peace, correct?
Yes.
Well, we
Yes.
fund the U.S. Institute for Peace.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways we do it, is we
USIP,
fund.
we are working in reconciliation and mediate the conflict, how to reduce the conflict in
Yes.
the area.
But that's what I'm saying, that's where we tend to do it is, for example, we would give money to an organization such as U.S. Institute for Peace. We give money to Amar.
Yeah.
They turn around and give money to local organizations because it's the least bureaucratic, easiest way for groups such as yours to access money.
Yes, thank
It's
you
not
very much.
always ideal, but you have to think about if we were to support, we do upwards of $20 million of programming in Iraq every year. If we were to take that $20 million and give out $50,000 grants, we just couldn't do it. So I hear your problem, and we do try to find workarounds.
Thank you very much.
But I do want you to know, we do support your organization, we have for a long, long
Thank you
time.
very much.
My name is Ilhan Kagri from the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And I know this panel is about funding, but I'm just wondering what mechanisms are in place for supporting these brave souls who are working on the ground in terms of getting, sort of top-down government protections or government pressures. So, for example, the Magnitsky Act and, for example, USERF sanctions where you're not going to issue waivers, and whether there's communication and what kind of communication there exists between, your offices and where those might be, please.
Yep, that's the nitty-gritty work of the State Department.
Absolutely, and when I talked at the opening about using the tools of diplomacy in thoughtful and effective ways to actually get change accomplished, that's really what we're talking about. I think the wonderful aspect of the partnership between what Pat and her office do and what I and my office do is all about bridging that gap. Oftentimes, if we are messaging aggressively to a government saying, these laws are totally inconsistent with international standards. We think that there are ways that you should reform your legislation to bring them into conformity. At the same time, we may be working to empower civil society organizations in those countries to make the same demands of their own authorities. That's it's another version of what Pat was referring to earlier in this kind of top-down, bottom-up approach. So a lot of our effectiveness across the realm of religious freedom concerns that we have around the world rests on our ability to both push messages to governments through diplomatic channels, again through public statements, through private engagement, and then also to look at the state of affairs within that country and say, wow, this is a country where you have people, rampant abuse of say blasphemy laws. And there are no lawyers willing to stand up and defend people accused of blasphemy. Can we find ways to support people, young lawyers or law students, in learning more about this area of the law so that we can create an effective cadre of individuals to protect people accused of blasphemy? So that's the kind of symbiotic approach that we really take.
And I will note that, yes, we do use what diplomatic tools we have at our disposal. I believe we just recently sanctioned some Burmese generals for what's happening in Burma and the Rohingya. So that's the most recent example, but I can assure you there is always messaging going on behind closed doors about religious freedom. And, you know, it's kind of a fact of psychology that sometimes doing it behind closed doors is far more effective. Nobody wants to look like they're being bullied publicly and then make a change. So that's one of the things we really can't talk about, but it does go on all the time about urging governments to stop a particular action or allow some religious freedom to go forward. But we do get down to the individual level as well, as you said, and Dan talked about we are also, in the worst case scenario, can help individuals if they have to relocate safely to a different place. We do that as well.
Thank you so very much, Father Andre Mahana. Save the persecuted Christians and the apostolate of Our Lady of Hope. You know, I'm a historian a little bit, and we see that there is always this trend in the world to kill minorities based on religion or based on whatever reason there is in the world. This is a promising program that you spoke about. Do you see improvement? Because we see there is an escalation in religious actually, let's call it persecution. There is escalation. How is your program improving the situation?
Well, that would be in an ideal world, would be preventing all of this if we could, instead of reacting after it's already happening. But a lot of this tolerance work that we do is aimed at it, and that's why I can't overemphasize how much of the work we do works with youth, that we're thinking that's a promising way. Maybe you can't change the views and attitudes of older populations, but let's work with the youth. Although I will, and I bet you're thinking the same thing, part of the reason this changes is that people can be manipulated. I mean, we have seen peaceful communities existing side by side for hundreds of years, and then somebody comes in and manipulates the narrative. That is a real problem, and it does happen, and it's painful to watch that happen. Sometimes we hope that some of this sticks. But even in those cases, we do have programs where we do what are called early warning and early response systems using technology. Actually, in parts of the world where there's conflict going on or a threat of conflict, that we work with local communities. It's not always religious-based. Sometimes it's ethnic-based communities. But we've designed programs where we kind of have local community watchers. They might physically be watching to see if there's a movement of strange, usually men, trucks, movement of people, and then they can call authorities, and we've seen this happen. They will send some troops or UN troops or what have you in and hopefully head off atrocities. It's very hard to say we prevented atrocities, but I am confident in saying we have done so.
So we have time for just two more questions, and I realize there are two folks at the mic who've been waiting quite a while, so please go ahead and come over here.
Nermeen Riyad, Coptic Orphans. Can you speak a little bit about when do we as the nonprofit work with your office here at the State Department versus the country office? In our case, it would be the embassy in Cairo.
We manage DRL, we manage all of our programs out of Washington, D.C., so we would work closely with our embassy in Cairo. So if you wanted to find out specifically about DRL's programs, you need to reach out here. Hopefully Embassy Cairo will refer you if you say we want to know something about DRL. Embassy Cairo, of course, is informed about all kinds of U.S. government funding. But if you were wanting to know if we're going to do something, if there's going to be a solicitation, what are we doing, that would be best to contact us here in Washington, D.C. I just want to go back to your question about preventing things. We also have some very grassroots programs in many communities around the world where we bring faith leaders together to say, can we come up with our own little system when a rumor starts? How can we head that off? And that has worked. I've seen it in some of the most sensitive places you can imagine, where when a rumor starts that one religion has done something that desecrated the other religion, they get together and say, it's a rumor, folks, settle down, settle down.
I was going to ask you, actually, how can we help you?
It's with faith-based leaders. They're the ones, because they're the ones that have the credibility, that know the people. And when they talk to one another, then they'll say, oh, if you said that, I believe you.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Hardyal Singh. I'm from an NGO that which is US-based and does advocacy and human development work. In our last mission to Iraq, we found that the Sikh Gurdwara, which was there, this was our first prophet, Guru Nanak, who visited in the 15th century. There was a Gurdwara, a Sikh temple there, but it's no longer existing now. It was there in between, but then now we saw that it's in ruins. There's a graveyard there and a junkyard that's built over there. So is it something, if we're looking to see if we can get it restored back, And is it something that we can work with you or the State Department or Office of Religious Freedom to see if that can be restored in some form or the other?
DRL generally doesn't do construction. That doesn't mean it doesn't get done. I believe there's a panel Thursday on preserving cultural heritage.
Okay.
I'm not saying no, it's not. I mean, if we were to do something like that, it would be because we're trying to bring reconciliation or build tolerance within a community. So what we would say in this case, we want you to understand this community has always been here. And here we can help. I mean, we can't do religious buildings in particular.
Okay.
We normally don't do buildings, but it could be something about understanding the history of.
Right.
I mean, that would be our approach. But I know there is a session on Thursday about this topic.
Right, because we do a concept of community
tomorrow,
kitchen.
sorry, I forgot what day of the week
We
it
have
is.
a concept of community kitchen where we serve food, as you know, that it's called langar throughout the United States. So if we could like to restore that over there too. So maybe I'll attend the tomorrow session and then get
Sure.
more into that. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you so much for the interest. Pat and her team will be around during this upcoming break, so if there are other questions that folks have, please seek them out in the area behind you. We're currently going to go to break for 30 minutes, so please use that time to network and catch up on email and whatever else you need to do, and we'll see you back here at 3:40. Thank you very much for your time.
No, try it. Okay. You took me. Okay. So I'm going to talk. Like this, like this, like this, like this, talking. And then the reason that we do that, okay, if you want to make good oatmeal cookies, the trick is, what? Where? Okay, there.